All right, so today we're going to go over toxic relationships. And we're going to come at the angle of toxic relationships from a couple different perspectives. The first perspective is what can we do ourselves if we're in a toxic relationship? And secondly, we're going to go over how should we be vetting out people when we're going out making new relationships with people. How should we be looking at other people and determining whether or not they'd actually be a good fit for us? And that would be essentially a good fit to actually explore something a little bit deeper. So I think the best place to start, and this is going to be the best place to start no matter what you're doing, is start with yourself. You know, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote the Gulag Archipelago, he did something really interesting because he was basically put into this camp in this prison, and instead of looking out to the world and blaming the world for his problems, instead he actually looked within himself and he tried to take extreme ownership over the situation to see what he did that ultimately would have led the country at the time to get to where it was. So even though he wasn't directly implicated in the stuff that happened, he wanted to take ownership of it to see, what role did I have in this? And I think that that's extremely, 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 extremely important. Because the thing is a relationship becomes a responsibility. It becomes a responsibility, especially if you're a man. It's our responsibility to take good care of our families. It's our responsibility to be good stewards towards our families. We should provide for them financially, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and really be the leader of our home and of our family. And so when we're looking at toxic relationships, we've got to kind of start looking at it from that frame of ownership of, first and foremost, before I go in and audit what's wrong with the relationship, I'm going to come at it from the frame of I did something wrong. This is my responsibility. I'm going to take ownership over my role in whatever has gone astray or gone awry in this relationship because it's my fault. It's my fault that maybe I didn't vet this person properly, or maybe I didn't learn the skills that I should have learned before getting into this relationship. Or, maybe I forgot to do something at the beginning of the relationship that, really kind of set it off on a bad course. And so that's first and foremost one of the most important things that we need to start doing as men, especially, is we need to start taking extreme ownership over our own lives and then also the people and other responsibilities that are a part of our life. And so if we're in a relationship with someone, I'm here to propose that it would be wise to take responsibility over that person, to make them your responsibility. And what you actually get from that is a reward that, can't really be put into words. It's this fulfillment that you can only obtain through taking responsibility and taking ownership. So that's first and foremost is the mindset. Now, when we're going and, we take that stance, we take that mindset, now we look back upon ourselves to try and figure out, okay, where did I go wrong in this relationship? Now, there's about 8 different things that make a person a person. So there's your mental well-being, there's your spiritual well-being, there's your physical well-being, so like your body, So basically your mind, your body, and your spirit. And then you have your activities and your interests. And then you have your environment that you're within, that you're basically living in. And then there's the relationships that you have in your life. And then there's the story that you tell yourself about your life. You know, from the day I was born, my name has been this, and I'm this old, and, when I was this old, this happened, and so on and so forth. There's this background life story that we have playing within our mind. And so, we have all these things that are kind of roaming around that make a person a person. And if we really want to get to the bottom of what role we played in a toxic relationship, we sort of have to audit all of those things. We have to take into account our entire personhood and audit our entire personhood instead of just looking at it of the face of it of like, okay, I did this thing wrong, or, maybe my behavior wasn't the greatest in this relationship, which behavior is the eighth and final one. And so doing a really comprehensive, in-depth audit of yourself will really give you, like when you go to the doctor and you have like a symptom that's going on and the doctor just kind of sends you out, they're like, I don't really know what's going on with you, but, here's some medication to cover the short-term pain. That's kind of what doing like a really brief audit and reconciliation of yourself is like. Because you might be able to, make up for that one small thing and, maybe make things better for a short term. But what's going to really create long-lasting change in your life is taking into account your entire self as a whole. Your entire self as a whole. So the question is how do we do that, right? And, I asked myself that question, pretty obsessively for a long time. And that's how I came up with those 8 different elements that make a person a person. And the reason that I did that was so that we could take a holistic approach to our life. So that we could be like, okay, I'm going to take an audit of all these 8 different things, and I'm going to figure out which is my strongest, which is my weakest, and what things are kind of just in between. And I actually have a pretty comprehensive assessment that you can take for yourself, and it covers all 8 of these different elements and all 8 of these different principles. So if that's something you're interested in, comment down below and I can actually just shoot that over to you. I will send you the link. No charge at all. That'll be free. So we have these 8 different things. And I actually have these 8 different things written back here because I'm working on continuing to develop out my coaching program. But okay, let's start with physicality. Are we treating our bodies with respect? How are we going about our diet and our exercise? Are we eating healthy? Are we even exercising? And if we are exercising, like, are we doing cardio? Are we doing things that, kind of give us life and energy? And the whole kind of point of diet and exercise is to orient the body so that the mind and the spirit can kind of do their thing a lot better. Because here's the thing, if you don't work out and if you don't eat right, it's going to lead to, like, your poor bodily state is going to lead to a poor mental state, and a poor spiritual state. And so by optimizing our body, it actually helps to optimize our mind and our spirit. And that's really kind of the beauty behind these 8 different tiers, is that each of them are connected because they're all a part of us and they're all a part of our entire personhood. And so when we improve one, it's going to have second order consequences on the others, which is amazing, which is really great actually. Because you know what that means? It means that if we now we have a framework. Now we have these 8 different things that we can pinpoint, like, okay, you know, I have a score of like a 20 out of 100 on my physical well-being. You know, my spiritual well-being might be like a 60 out of 100, and my mental well-being might be like a 50 out of 100. So now by improving your physical well-being, you can also have second order impacts on your spiritual and your mental well-being. So maybe your spiritual well-being goes up to 75, and maybe your mental well-being goes up to 80. And so just by improving that one pillar, it now has trickle-down effects on all the other pillars. But without even knowing that the other pillars existed, you wouldn't have any type of a benchmark or a guideline to be able to measure those improvements over time. Because if you don't have like an initial baseline of your current performance, you're not going to be able to measure progress. You're not going to be able to see, oh, I'm actually making progress. And that's what makes life really confusing, is that we don't have a baseline, and there's all these different 8 elements, 8, and without the baseline, we can't see whether we're regressing or progressing. Okay, so there's the physical aspect of, let's start eating a lot better. Let's start exercising. And I highly recommend doing like a full body type of an approach where you actually exercise your whole body. The reason that I recommend that is because when you get older, when you get to 60, 70, 80, if you want to prevent your feet from getting corns, like you should probably pay attention to your feet. You should probably start working out your feet. Otherwise, your feet are going to harden up like a rock, and they're not going to be serving you very well if you continue to neglect them over time. I hardly see anybody doing foot workouts, but I see a lot of people in older age and their feet look horrible. And no offense, but the reason that is because when's the last time you did a foot workout? My guess is probably been a long, 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 long time. And so what we can do now, if you're around my age or even a little bit older, even a little bit younger, is we can start taking and reverse engineering where we want to be when we're 70, 80 years old, and we can bring it here and start paying attention to it now. It's sort of like, paying attention to a retirement fund when you're this age, so that when you're that age, you have wealth to be able to leverage. But true wealth is really going to be found in how healthy your body is. If you got all the money in the world, but you can't get out of bed because your body's falling apart, that money's not going to matter. I mean, the only thing that it's going to do is help you drag along a little bit longer. Maybe get into a retirement home so that you can drag on through life. But that's not really a life. If someone's in that situation right now, like, they'll tell you, like, I wish I would have done things different. And so we start doing things different now. And we learn from our elders, and, we respect them, we honor them, and we treat them as if they have something worth hearing, which they do. And so there's the physical aspect. getting your diet right. For getting your diet right, I'd recommend doing a check-in with your body right now, seeing how your body feels, and then just start paying attention to how your body reacts to the different foods that you're eating. I did an elimination diet and have been doing an elimination diet, and that's been the only thing that's really kind of helped me dial in my diet. Recently, a question that I've been asking myself is, what foods do I eat that I feel the best afterward? Like where I just kind of feel this smooth, slow burning energy. And for me, it's things like a nice steak, ground beef, chicken, avocados, let's see what else, eggs, things like that. When I eat them, I don't get this big dopamine spike or anything like that. It's just smooth, sustaining energy. And that kind of ties into the core philosophy of becoming more equanimous. Those like investment charts and those graphs, and you'll see all these spikes and these downward trends and these upward trends and these downward trends. That's sort of how we live our life traditionally as Americans, is we're always looking for that next spike in dopamine, the next stimulant. But the thing is if we live our life like this, what's going to happen is we're going to have a massive crash out. Whoa! Where am I? Sorry, I just scared my dogs. I just woke up underneath my desk to tell you, hey, if you're enjoying this video and you want some more content just like it, I actually have a free Facebook group that you can go and join and engage with a bunch of people who are like you, who are interested in similar topics, and you can get more content from me if that's something you're interested in. So go down to the link in the description and you will find the Facebook group. And we're going to keep having that pattern over and over again. And so what I've learned is that chasing more of an equilibrium where, maybe you have these minor spikes and these like minor crashes, but that's way better than boom, 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 boom. It's way better. And so the core philosophy of chasing after an equilibrium, makes us a lot more consistent over time. And so instead of chasing for dopamine spikes that are followed by massive crashes afterward, what we can do is find those things that sustain us. And those things that sustain us will sustain us over time. They'll carry us into longer age. They'll increase the likelihood that we live longer. They'll reduce our cortisol spikes, which stress and cortisol, they kind of have like this aging effect. They accelerate aging. When you look at someone who's like extremely stressed out and they look like they're 20 years older than they actually are, that's the catabolic essence of cortisol. So cortisol will kind of accelerate the aging process. If you look at someone who, pays attention to their physical, spiritual, and mental well-being and, tries to incorporate things to optimize those areas, well, like Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson, he is incorporating this whole anti-aging routine, and it's working. I don't think that should be someone's main drive and purpose in life, but it goes, goes as it's going. So doing the elimination diet can help you find the foods that really create the sustainable energy and can help you identify and weed out the foods that create these massive spikes. Because massive spikes over time are going to lead to, bigger crash outs over time. And so that's kind of the key components of physical health. The third aspect of it would be our emotions and understanding our emotions. But simply through the process of working out really well and eating really well, that in itself will help your emotions so much. But emotions are definitely a little more finicky, especially for men. I feel like men don't really understand a lot of the emotions that they feel. We sort of have this really high stress capacity. We can handle a lot of stress and, we just feel fine. We're just kind of used to that. But a lot of the times when we're feeling something, we don't necessarily know like what we're feeling. Like we might be feeling resentment or envy, or we might be feeling betrayed. But can we actually label that when we feel it? And not really. We don't really have a lot of emotional intelligence as men. And so learning more about those emotions so that when they come up, we know what they are, and then we can actually process them and kind of neutralize those emotions as they come up. Versus, I'm going to stuff these emotions down and then I'm just going to explode once my bottle gets too full and I can no longer handle it. And so we have to take responsibility over our emotional state. And not only that, it's like really important because emotions are sort of like this navigation tool for us to realize like, oh, that person betrayed me. I feel betrayed. My heart kind of aches a little bit. I feel really betrayed right now. Versus if you didn't know how to label that, you'd just be like, oh, like, this is just normal. This is normal pain. Versus now it's like, okay, I feel betrayed. I'm going to tell that person, hey, like what you did, it really betrayed my trust. And, I don't really know how to fully process that, but I don't know if I can trust you because you betrayed me. And then you can kind of look and see how that person reacts. Do they try to gaslight you? Do they try to avoid the situation? Do they not really say anything at all? And do they try to avoid it over the span of like a couple of weeks? Like they don't say anything about it? If that's the case, you might not want to be with that person. And you might not want to be with that person because they're not taking accountability. If they truly did something wrong and they broke your trust and they betrayed you, and they're not taking any accountability, not apologizing, they're not feeling repentant, they're not like, oh, like, I'm so sorry, like, you're right, like, I want to make this up to you. It's probably not someone you want to be with. So there's our emotional state, understanding our emotions, getting better at labeling them so that we can then actually process them, and then we can actually communicate them to people to let them know how we actually feel, how we're perceiving different situations. So the physical aspect, getting your diet, your exercise, and your emotions in check. Those three right there, those will be huge wins. Huge wins for yourself. The second one would be your mental well-being. Mental well-being is huge. Especially in today's modern age, we're having a lot of mental health problems. Guys are struggling with this pretty severely. And so how do we get this mental aspect right? And it's tricky. It's a tricky subject because a lot of therapists, can't really help you. A lot of people have really poor experiences at a therapist. And talk therapy, like, I think that it's really just kind of a band-aid for more of a bigger problem. And it's a bigger problem oriented around all 8 of these different elements. And so what do we do, right? Well, the first thing we do is we figure out how we can even attack the problem in the first place. And something that's really helpful to understand about your mind is there's like an environment going on in there. There's like a mental landscape that is occurring within your mind. And so if you picture it like, your mind has trees and grass and dirt and water is flowing, but is your mind like a constant storm, or do you have like clear days, where there's no clouds in the sky, it's just really sunny out? I think a lot of people are having a lot of stormy days in their mind. And there's things and there's mechanisms that lead to those storms, because everything that we put into our mind influences the temperature. It influences the weather. It influences how healthy that landscape and that environment is. So if we're filling our mind with junk, it's just like filling our body with junk. When we fill our body with junk, it feels terrible. When we fill our body with junk, it doesn't perform at its highest capacity. It doesn't reach its fullest potential. And oftentimes it blocks the body from doing what it's supposed to do. And it creates all this disease and dysfunction. And it's the same thing with our mind. But what we're not very good at is being able to recognize what is something that I can put into my mind that is healthy, and also being able to recognize what is unhealthy. What are things that I put into my mind that are unhealthy? Now, how do we go about that? One really good way is to leverage a virtue system. You've heard that word before, like, oh, virtues. But virtues are actually extremely helpful because they create a map. They create a map for the abstract things that we can't really touch, and they tell us whether or not those things are good, whether it's a virtue or a vice. A virtue or a vice. And so a virtue, is something like leadership. A virtue is something like responsibility, ownership, faith, hard work, these things that are good. And a vice might be something like immodesty, irresponsibility, slothfulness. These things are inherently bad. And so by being able to recognize, okay, that thing is inherently good, like I know virtue is good, so now I kind of have this filtering process where now I can look at the world and I can identify, okay, that thing was virtuous. Or I can be like, okay, that was a vice. That's a vice. And so when we're going through and, maybe we're watching something on TV or we're scrolling through social media, now we can see, okay, that person was actually really responsible. Like, that's good content. I'm glad I watched that because, I put that into my mind, so maybe it'll have an impact on me, a positive impact. And another good way to think about it is this person being a good influence on me or a bad influence on me? Because what happens ever since we were really little is we will observe the world and then we will mirror the world. So when we were very little, we watched our parents and we watched their behavior very closely because it's all we had to do. We're just trying to figure out the world. We're trying to figure out how to survive. And so we watch our parents try to figure out, okay, they're behaving like this, so I should behave like this. They're saying this, so I should say this. They're watching this, so I should watch this. So we start to mirror our parents or, other parental figures. Could be grandparents, could be aunts, uncles, older siblings, so on and so forth. So now we still have that to us. We are observing the world and we're mirroring behavior. Now, A lot of times we don't really realize that we're mirroring behavior, and we don't really have a filtering process to be like, I don't want to mirror that person, because we're not looking at the world through this lens of, okay, this person's a good influence, this person's a bad influence. And when we can recognize, oh, that person's a bad influence, now we have a filtering process for incoming information. So when we see someone who's a good influence, we can be like, oh, that's a good influence. Like, they're doing some really cool stuff. I really like what they're doing, actually. And I want to be more like that. And so it kind of hijacks the body's mechanism for watching and observing and then mirroring. Kind of activates the mirror neurons. And it also allows us to be like, okay, that person's a bad influence. Like, no, we're not going there. We're not doing that. We don't want to be like that. So it tells the body and it tells the mind what you actually want, versus just like going through life without knowing, without having any type of a map, and just kind of playing it by ear, not really having any type of a strategy. So by establishing a line of virtues, we can now figure out, okay, what's good, what's bad, who's a good influence, who's a bad influence, who do I want to be more like, who do I want to be less like. And that makes life a lot easier and a lot more simple, because we can now strive towards virtue and we can strive away from vice. Because by putting ourselves into environments that are virtuous, we can start to mirror that behavior, because that's naturally what we do as humans, is we mirror behavior. We see somebody we look up to and we're like, well, I want to be more like that person. And on the other side, we see someone who isn't doing so well and we're like, dude, I don't want to be like that at all. So that kind of gives you a framework for thinking about these things a little bit more properly. The next thing for your mentality and for your mental well-being is closing the tabs. If you do any type of computer work, or, you've ever just been on a computer, if you do like an assignment or a project on there, it can be really easy to open up like 100 tabs and have like 10 different applications running at once. And what does that do to your computer? You got 100 tabs open and 5 different browsers. It slows your computer down because there's so many different tasks running. And so it slows your computer down and it doesn't perform as well as it could. Versus if you just had one tab open and, one application open, just focused on what you're actually doing right now and closing all the other tabs up. So it's the same thing with our brain. If we don't close the loop on things, and, let's say we told someone that we would be somewhere at 4:30. And instead of like putting it on a schedule, we tried to remember it. And we tried to keep it in our mind. So now that's running in the background of our mind while we're trying to work, while we're spending time with our family. We're trying to remember this thing because we didn't delegate it. And so essentially what we have to do is we have to delegate out these things so that we can clear and close the tabs in our mind so that our mind can run and function properly and at its highest level. So by closing out the tabs, our brain can function a lot better and we can think a lot more clearly. So instead of trying to hold that appointment in your mind, what you can do is just put it on your Google Calendar, or while you're working on something on your laptop, instead of keeping 200 tabs open, you can just close all the tabs and then just keep the one tab open that you're actually working on. And that's going to help your brain and your mind to focus better because there's not a million distractions. And it's going to help your computer actually run faster. So it's kind of a win-win. You get to be more efficient. And so that's kind of what it's all about, right? Is it's all about distraction. We want to mitigate distraction. We want to mitigate distraction because it's junk. It's not helpful. It's not conducive. And so like, for example, if you're in your office and let's say I had like my Xbox or something, and well, I have my Xbox controller right here, right? And so let's say I was like addicted to playing Xbox. Well, if I'm addicted to playing Xbox and I just have my Xbox controller sitting on my desk, it's like, dude, that's all I'm going to think about. I'm just going to think about turning this thing on and going to town. But I don't really have that issue. I'm like completely dialed in on this video right now. And so by mitigating distraction, by closing the tabs, we set ourselves up better to perform at the things we want to perform at. And that's something that we can do. That is something we can do. We can orient our environment to mitigate distraction, to mitigate unnecessary things in front of us so that we can actually focus on the task at hand. And this is making a lot of people like feel like they're not present in the moment. The reason that you're not present in the moment is because you have stuff running in your mind. And this could be stuff that's like replaying daily. Maybe it's emotions that you haven't processed. Maybe it's events that happened to you that you haven't processed. And, maybe it's thinking about just something completely different. Whether you're like really into sports and maybe you're thinking about the basketball game later tonight, or you're thinking about, oh, like I got to get to the gym after this or something like that. And, you just have all this stuff running in your head and you can't be present right here, right now, engaging in what you're doing because you have all this other stuff happening. Whether it's stuff in the past or stuff in the future. So what we really want to do is we want to reconcile as much stuff in the past as we can through focusing on these 8 layers and these 8 elements, which we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that with the life story aspect, but also reconciling the stuff in the future. Because the reason we're keeping the tabs open is like we want to save it for something, but we're probably not even going to go back to it. I have that happen to me all the time where it's like I have 10 tabs open and I try to keep one open so I don't forget about it, but I don't even end up going back to it in the first place. So it just ended up being a distraction. And so by reconciling future things that we might want to do, like instead of keeping that tab open, I could maybe just bookmark the tab, put it in somewhere, put it in a bookmark, and save it for later so that I can keep it organized and revisit if I want to. But then with like future events, instead of trying to remember them off the top of our head, we can just set a reminder on our phone. We can be like, hey Siri, set a reminder at 4 o'clock for my appointment at 4:30. And now you don't have to think about it anymore. You've delegated that. So those are just a couple of things for your overall mental well-being. Processing emotion is also going to really have an impact on your mental well-being, because if you learn how to process emotion, how to label the emotion, how to identify what you're actually feeling in association with the emotion, and then how to neutralize the emotion, basically process it, and then how to move forward into the future so that you might be able to avoid this emotion completely and the situation that happened that was revolving around the emotion, or be able to, just better recognize the emotion in the first place, and then in the future, like just be able to process it like that. Because you know what the emotion is, you know what you're feeling, and you know how to neutralize it, and then you know how to move forward. Hey, it's me again. I just wanted to tell you something very, very important. I have a coaching program that teaches you all about this stuff and how to become a better version of you. And so if that sounds like something that you're interested in, click the link down below. You can book a call with me. There's no sales gimmicks, anything like that. It's just a personal one-on-one call, and we'll figure out and see if the program's a good fit for you. If not, you might just get some free resources, free value, and a chance to come hang out with me. And yeah, so if that sounds like something you're interested in, make sure to click the link down below, book a call with me, and I will talk to you then. So if we get stuck where we're just feeling the emotion or we're not processing it all, that is going to really stagnate our mind. And it's going to leave us caught in the past. I think the past was over here. And it's going to prevent us from reconciling the past. All right, so I think the last one that we'll cover for today will be spiritual well-being. And because, we're already about 43 minutes into the video, and we've only talked about 3 so far. And this is just like the surface level stuff, guys. I have a way deeper approach and philosophies and exercises within my coaching program. So we're just going to cover the surface level stuff here that you can take and you can apply today. So the third one is spiritual well-being. How do we get our spiritual well-being right? Because we kind of know that, all right, we have this spiritual part of ourself, this part of ourself that sort of transcends reality. But how do we align ourselves with our spirit? What does our spirit want? And so no matter where you're at with God, with your journey and spirituality, with your faith, some really good things to start asking yourself is, what do I believe about God? What do I believe about life and death? Do I believe that I'm going to go somewhere when I die? If so, why? Do I believe in Jesus? If so, why? And if you're outside of like a church or any type of a structured religion, it can be really difficult to create an organized structure around your spirituality, which spirituality is a really important aspect of your life. So you might consider joining a religion, joining something that helps you deal with and orient your spirit. Because it's this thing that transcends reality. It's so difficult to come to grips with and understand it. So for me, I'm Catholic. I love being Catholic. And I love being Catholic because of all the different opportunities that are within the church. Like, not only is there this beautiful Mass every single day where we're going to Mass and we're celebrating Jesus and we're consecrating ourselves to Jesus, but there's all these different communal opportunities. There's Bible studies that you can go to. There's youth groups. There's adoration. There's community events, speaking events. There's all these different opportunities for you to now be a part of a community and go and improve your spirit. Go improve your spiritual health. So starting to ask yourself those fundamental questions of what you believe and tussling with those, wrestling with that is really good. Getting involved into a community that believes the same things that you do, that you can go out and you can engage with people, you can engage with your faith. And then in Catholicism and Christianity, there is this virtue and vice structure, and something that actually really helps your spirit is to strive towards virtue. And Jesus taught us this because he lived the perfect life. Okay, he lived a perfectly virtuous life. And so he came here to set an example for us, to show us, hey, this is how you should want to go about your life. And so he came down and he showed us that. And now we can take the lessons that we learned from him and we can apply them to our life. And what I've learned through that process is that I feel so much more fulfilled with my life when I strive to be more like Jesus, when I strive to be more like the virtuous people who I see are very Christ-like. So it revitalizes my spirit. And then there's things like the sacraments. These things revitalize your spirit. And they're typically things that people don't really like to do, but after they do them, they feel a lot better. It's like going to the gym. When you go to the gym, oftentimes you don't want to do it. Sometimes you feel terrible while you're going through the workout. And by the end of the workout, you get done, you're like, oh my gosh, like I feel really good. Man, let's go. Like I'm ready for the day. It's the same thing with prayer. It's the same thing with confession. You know, we don't really want to take time out to pray, to build a relationship with God. But when we do it, we feel better. We feel better afterwards. And there's actually some like frameworks and, you know, things that you can learn from reading the Bible about how to pray and how to pray better. You know, like for example, you know, God doesn't want us to hold on to our burdens. You know, if we're really anxious about something, He wants us to give it to Him, to let Him take that from us. But a lot of times we get so identified with the anxiety where we're like, oh, like if I give this away, like this is a part of me. But the difference is when you start to go down this path that God has laid out for you, you start to realize, oh, my identity isn't just this. It's also who God wants me to be. It's also what God's calling me to do. And so if God's not calling me to hang on to this anxiety or this sadness or this negativity that I'm holding so deeply, take it, Lord. Take it from me. And if you genuinely ask Him, He will. He will do that. And so there's that aspect of prayer, which is very similar to confession, where before confession, you write down the things that you did since your last confession, and you take into account all your shortcomings, all your failures, all your mortal sins, your venial sins that you can recall, and you sit there and kind of just be with those and feel the shame and the guilt associated with that. And then don't cling on to it, because God's not calling you to cling to those. He's not calling you to cling to your sin. He's calling you to cling to Him. He wants you to cling to Him. And so while you're sitting there and kind of processing that, you know, just feel the urge to repent, to be sorry of like, gosh, I'm so frustrated with myself for having done these things. Like, God, I am genuinely and heartily sorry. And then when you actually go into the confessional, the priest can absolve you from your sin. And then you can do penance. No, the penance isn't hard. You know, it's like 3 Hail Marys a lot of the times. And it's like, it's nothing, but it is something. That's the point. It is something. You know, versus just collecting and storing this sin inside of you. Now you have a framework for letting it out, being sorry for it, and trying to do something to reconcile yourself to God to try and make up for it. So penance isn't nothing. What I meant is like, you know, if you say 3 Hail Marys and you just like do it genuinely and you do it in that spirit of repentance and wanting to reconcile yourself to God, you know, it's not like it takes a long time. That's what I mean by it's nothing. It's not like you have to go and do 2 hours of community service. But that's kind of the framework, right, for processing your sin and processing your shortcomings. Because the thing is like the more we sin, the more the demons start to cling to us. And that's what happens really when you go to a confession. It's like you're absolved from your sin, but you're also absolved from the demons that are trying to take advantage of you and open a portal through you through the means of your sin. You may have a demon attached to you that's causing you to have certain thoughts, that's causing you to do certain things. And that's what they're there to do. That's what they want to do to you. They want to steer you away from God. They want to influence you to go into vice instead of virtue. And so what happens is if you don't go and be absolved to God and try to reconcile yourself to God, that's the beauty of confession is you get to do that. But if you don't do that, these demons will just pile up, and this sin and this negativity and this darkness will just keep stacking. And it can lead to poor physical health and poor mental health. Because it's your poor spiritual health is leading to your poor mental and physical health. So those are all amazing things. Is starting to ask yourself those questions, getting involved into a community, focusing on being more virtuous and trying to do the right thing versus the wrong thing, getting involved in the sacraments, in prayer. And the beautiful thing about Mass is that when you go to Mass, not only do you get to celebrate the Eucharist, but in the beginning, during the offertory, you are forgiven of your venial sins as well. So if you're in mortal sin, then you have to go into a confessional to be absolved from those sins. But if you have venial sins that you're carrying while you're at Mass, the Lord replenishes you and forgives you just throughout Mass. And that's just one part of it. That's like the first 5 minutes. And then with the Eucharist is just so beautiful because when you take the Eucharist, you're actually consuming the real body and flesh of Jesus. And it's a mystery as to why God wants us to do that. But to me, it makes some sense. If I wanted someone to be one with me, and I was this like infinite God, then, why wouldn't they consume me? Because, you can be, by consuming him, you become one with him, and you become in communion with him. That's why it's called communion. He who eats my flesh and he who drinks my blood is in me. And so there's the Mass, the beauty of the Mass. Not only is there those aspects, but there's also the praying with your community. There's the singing, the beautiful songs. And after Mass, you just feel good. You feel revitalized. Your spirit feels revitalized. So there's all these different things that you can do within a religious community to revitalize your spirit and to improve your spiritual health. So you're not alone. You're not alone in it. You're not trying to figure it out yourself. You have a whole community behind you. So in today's video, we covered physical health, mental health, and spiritual health. And in the next one, we'll try to get through maybe 3 more of the 8 elements. But again, if you want to take that comprehensive assessment, I call it the me score. So basically you'll go through a series of questions that'll ask you about each of these different pillars of your life, and it'll just kind of give you a baseline score of where you're at in those areas of your life. And that can be kind of intimidating, but you want to be able to see where you're at now so that you can identify like, okay, I need some work. Like, I need to figure this stuff out. Okay, so, we'll try and get through the 8 different pillars, and then we'll talk about later on, like, once you get through these pillars and once you start improving these 8 different parts of your life, now you're going to have a really, really solid map to go out and look for a partner, or to try and figure out like what are the grievances between you and your existing partner and within your toxic relationship if you're going through that. So that is going to be it for today's video. I'll see you on the next one.